My name is Scott Becker, and I'm pleased to be moderating our first session, as well as welcoming you today to our Ransomware and our Ransomware and Remediation Summit, brought to you by Rubrik. The editorial team at Virtualization Cloud Review has worked hard to bring together some of the best independent experts on this topic for this event, so we really hope you enjoy it. Before we start today's event with these three great sessions, we do have some announcements. First, we wanted to let you know that this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You'll receive an email when the replay is available. Generally, that's within the next few days. Each of today's three sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A, so please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A area of your console as they come up so we can get them answered for you by our experts. And during today's third session, we'll be giving away a Sonos soundbar, but you must be present to win, so be sure to stay on for the entire event. Finally, we do have resources from Rubrik available in the console right now, so please download and check those out. It's because of Rubrik underwriting this content that we can bring you this summit, so we thank them for sponsoring this summit and supporting the community, and ask you to check out those resources so we can bring you more events like this in the future. So now on to the first session of today's summit, which is Top Enterprise Ransomware Threats Right Now. This session features Alan Liska, and Alan is a security researcher at Recorded Future. So he's seen firsthand the damage ransomware attacks can cause and how these ransomware actors operate and communicate with each other. He's regularly appeared on PBS NewsHour, CNN, ABC, NBC, and CBS. Been quoted in several outlets, including the Financial Times, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. He's also written a lot of articles about ransomware, and has written a book about ransomware as well, Ransomware Defending Against Digital Extortion. And he's been busy in this last week as well, given that that expertise. So Alan regularly does ransomware updates for us, and today it's really timely. So since we scheduled this summit, we've had three huge ransomware incidents that actually affected everyone, not just the IT community. And I'm talking, of course, about Colonial Pipeline, JBS, and then most recently Cox Media. So Alan, welcome, and I believe you hold former CISA Director Chris Krebs personally responsible for the latest attack?
I do. So Chris Krebs went on CNN and nationally said, they've come for our gas, they've come for our hot dogs, what can they possibly come after next? So, of course, the ransomware actors had to go for a television station because, you can't be America without gas, hot dogs, and TV. I mean, I think somebody should take Mrs. Schmidt and lock her away securely to make sure she's okay. Don't want anybody going after our apple pies.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah, well, take it away, Alan.
Sure. Thank you, Scott, and thank you to everybody here at the Rubrik for sponsoring this. I always enjoy these events, and we get a lot of great questions. So I'm going to get through the deck as quickly as we can, and hopefully get to the questions and really get down into the details with everybody. So I want to start by saying that ransomware in 2021 has been very weird. We started the year off with the NetWalker ransomware being taken down, then Egregor ransomware being taken down, and more importantly, not only was their infrastructure seized, they haven't come back. We haven't seen any new attacks from either of these events. We even saw an arrest of a ransomware actor who was an affiliate of the GanCrab ransomware back in 2019. So we're starting the year off with a lot of law enforcement activity. And then we saw DarkSide ransomware being taken offline. So DarkSide was the ransomware group responsible for the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. And it was very interesting to watch their reaction over a 3-day period where they went from, look at us, look what we did, look at all the gas, gas pipelines, or all the gas deliveries we disrupted, and the long lines, and running around bragging and taking a victory lap on these dark web forums for their great attack, to go very quickly from that to, I think I'm going to go spend more time with my family, or whatever ransomware actors do when they've decided to retire. It's easy to be brave and brag on dark web forums until the president calls you out by name, and then you really thought about how badly you screwed up. So DarkSide's gone into hiding. They don't seem to be coming back. We're not seeing any attacks from them. And between that, obviously ransomware's over, right? No problems. Well, we already know that's not true. We had right after Colonial Pipeline, HSC, which is the Irish healthcare system, went offline. Meat supplier JBS was offline. Just this past weekend, Recorded Future saw 24 new ransomware victims published to ransomware extortion sites. And then, as Scott said, even though they haven't officially announced it, it appears Cox Media has been hit with a ransomware attack to the point where local news reporters and news anchors are handwriting their scripts because all of their systems offline. And there were a couple of articles saying how for the first time in 20-some years, some of these local stations just didn't run nightly news last night because they couldn't. So even though it hasn't been officially called a ransomware attack, it has all the hallmarks of a ransomware attack, and we suspect that it is. So this is kind of a picture of what the ransomware landscape looks like right now. We've crossed out a whole lot of first and second tier, or mostly second tier ransomware actors this year that have gone on to either retired or gone on to do other things or just decided they didn't want to be involved in ransomware anymore. The problem is that ransomware right now is so incredibly profitable. It is by far the most profitable cybercriminal activity that every time one ransom group is taken down or sidelined, another one steps up to take its place. And a lot of that has to do, and Scott, you and I have talked about this before, with the explosion of ransomware as a service. For those of you who are new or haven't experienced this before, what ransomware as a service is a threat actor, a ransomware actor, basically leases out their ransomware infrastructure. So they take they take their ransomware, they sign on what they call affiliates. That's their term, not ours. And they basically, an affiliate will pay a certain amount of money, a couple $100 to a couple $1,000 depending on the ransomware offering. And the ransomware actor, the developer, gives the affiliate their own portable executable and then access to the entire ransomware infrastructure. So all the affiliate has to do is deploy the ransomware, and then the ransomware operator, the RAS operator, does the negotiation, does the handles the payment processing, and then just pays the affiliate their cut. And we see this incredible growth of ransomware as a service means that if a ransomware goes down, so when NetWalker went down or when Egregor went down, all of the affiliates, the main threat actors are now offline, but all of the affiliates for that RAS offering quickly jump to another one. So they move to Avedon or Conti or one of the other up-and-coming RAS offerings out there. So the RAS operator benefits multiple ways. Obviously, they get the money from the ransomware itself, but because the affiliates have to pay to get into the system, they use the money they get from the affiliates to make early improvements to their RAS offering. So they build better portals on the back end, they build better infrastructure, they make improvements to their code, et cetera. And then that, again, has a cyclical effect where it attracts more affiliates to their particular RAS as a service. And what that means that if you go back to 2015 or 16, we saw maybe a handful of groups delivering ransomware, but now ransomware has become so profitable, there are dozens of active ransomware families going on, but there are hundreds of ransomware actors behind those families. So every ransomware as a service offering has somewhere between, prominent ransomware as a service offering has somewhere between 10 and 20 affiliates associated with them. And so you start multiplying that out and you see why ransomware has been such a pervasive and hard to stop problem. And it also makes it difficult to protect against individual ransomware strains because you're really defending against dozens of affiliates, each with different TTPs. So I can't say, oh, well, if it's Conti ransomware, they must have gained access through phishing. Because, yes, some of the affiliates use phishing to gain access. Others might look for exposed remote desktop protocol. Others may have an exploit that they like to take. They like to take advantage of. Some look at credential reuse and take advantage of credential reuse. And in fact, some affiliates will join multiple RAS service simultaneously, so you may see the exact same TTPs associated with 2 or 3 different ransomware groups. There's one affiliate that we've tracked in ransomware negotiations where we're pretty sure it's the same affiliate who simultaneously has helped with multiple negotiations, and we know it's him because he uses the same password across all of his RAS offerings. So when you see the note pop up and it has a password in it, the password for him is always 123 123 123. So and we've seen that same password just used by that affiliate, and it's not a commonly used password by other RAS affiliates. So we think that he's just, whatever works better for a particular situation, that's the ransomware that he deploys in his activity.
Alan, I just wanted to break it there. That seems like a shockingly insecure password for somebody who's a security threat actor. So one other thing I wanted to ask you. Well, yeah, go ahead on that, and then I do have one other question before you go on. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the funny thing is that, especially with the affiliates, a lot of their OPSEC, operational security, is very, very poor. And in fact, when we talked about the NetWalker and the Egregor takedowns earlier, that's how law enforcement got to the main actors, was by using taking advantage of the poor OPSEC of some of their affiliates.
Interesting. And then the other thing I wanted to ask is just the abbreviation there, TTP. What does that stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry, tactics, techniques, and procedures. So those are the combination of indicators, traditional indicators like IP addresses, domains, file hashes, along with how those indicators are used in an attack. So do they like to use things like PSExec to move around the network? Do they prefer Cobalt Strike? Where do they like to host their command and control servers? That's all part of developing the big picture of what a threat actor's methodology looks like, basically. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So that is so that's kind of an overview of what the RAS offering looks like. Now, one of the things we did want to talk about, though, is who are the current threats? And right now, there are 3 really big ransomware actors that are concerning, that we're seeing the most activity from. There are a few others that are smaller that are not quite as active. So the first we'll talk about is Conti. Conti was first seen in May of 2020, and right now it is by far the most commonly deployed ransomware. When we talk about hands-on keyboard ransomware, it is the most commonly deployed ransomware. They maintain, as most ransomware actors do, they maintain an extortion site, which is post the name and shame of victims with data stolen. And again, they usually include a sampling of data to screenshot of corporate documents. And so they're the one that we're seeing that are the most prolific. For example, when we talked about this past weekend and 24 new ransomware victims posted to extortion sites, that is 16 of those 24 belong to Conti, and those are the ones that we know about. The real number is probably significantly higher because depending on how often the ransom's paid, et cetera, there are victims that never make it to the extortion website. So Abaddon is another one, and that was first observed in June of 2020, although the threat actor behind Abaddon had been active earlier in May as they were setting up the service. They're definitely what we would consider a second-tier operator, so they don't necessarily attract the best affiliates, but they are getting more aggressive in trying to attack, go after bigger targets, and with the bigger targets, they can attract they can attract more affiliates and more skilled affiliates. So, for example, after AXA Insurance in France claimed that they would not allow policyholders to use insurance payouts to pay ransom, they hit AXA in Japan. Now, that's probably coincidental, but it is certainly an interesting coincidence that an insurance company says, "Hey, we're not going to let any of our policyholders pay ransom anymore," and they immediately get hit with a ransomware attack in another part of their organization. The FBI and ASC, which is the Australian cybersecurity service, they issued a joint warning about the uptick in Abaddon-related activity in May of 2021. It's really worth finding that warning and reading it over because it's got a lot of good indicators in there, so a lot of good advice for defenders for how to protect against an attack from Abaddon. REvil is sort of the granddaddy of the next generation of ransomware actors, or this generation of ransomware actors. They've been active since at least April of 2019, and they're one of the most prolific ransomware groups that we've seen. They either purchased or stole the code from an earlier ransomware as a service offering, GandCrab. We don't know which, and with bad guys, it could easily be one or the other. And GandCrab had shut down in June of 2019. REvil was one of their affiliates that moved over, and again, they either bought the code or stole the code and launched their own ransomware as a service. So in December of 2019, REvil opened its own leak site where they released stolen files. They were one of the earliest ransomware actors to do that, not the earliest. The earliest was Maze, which has since shut down. The threat actor behind REvil goes by unknown on hacking forums, and again, in line with what a lot of the personas of these ransomware actors. Very big personality, very braggadocious, audacious, if you will. In February 2021, when they were recruiting new affiliates, they posted $1 million bounty to attract new affiliates. So basically, you can post a bounty to some of these underground forums to show that you actually have the money to pay something. And so they posted $1 million bounty as a way to get new affiliates in, and said that any new affiliates could split that $1 million before they even launched the first ransomware campaign. And then again, in a sign of how important extortion is, and we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes, they advertise an open affiliate position strictly for negotiating payments with victim organizations, and they've gotten much more aggressive. And, ransomware actors were already aggressive in their negotiations, but they've gotten much more aggressive, and REvil has led the way in this aggression with things like they actually rented call center space to reach out to their clients, to reach out to clients of potential victims, so that the clients could pressure the victims into paying the ransom. or start calling employees of these companies that have been hit by a ransomware attack and try and get the employees to pressure leadership to pay the ransom. So there's a lot of activity that's going on in that extortion ecospace. The Record did a really interesting interview with Unknown. Full disclosure, the Record is the media arm of Recorded Future, which is where I work. But it's still a very interesting interview where we talked where one of our reporters talked to him about why he does ransomware, how he got started, and a little bit about behind the scenes of how ransomware operators work. And I mentioned earlier that they're one of the most prolific. We know that there are at least 250 victims of REvil. That number, again, is probably 2 to 3 times higher than the known number of victims of REvil ransomware attacks. So that's a lot of time on keyboard. That's a lot of experience with these kind of attacks. And so we talked about earlier the diversifying attack ransomware attacks by attack vector. This is just from this year. And it basically looks at all of the different ways ransomware actors have gained access into networks. So we know phishing. Phishing is still probably the most common methodology, but just barely the most common methodology. Remote desktop protocol has become much more popular amongst ransomware actors. And what's interesting is that in a lot of ways, remote desktop protocol is cheaper than launching a phishing attack. So generally speaking, ransomware actors, ransomware affiliates are not experts in launching phishing campaigns. So they rent phishing infrastructure from another threat actor and you rely on that threat actor to deliver their phishing emails. With remote desktop protocol, literally all they have to do is start scanning, find open remote desktop protocol systems, and then either try common passwords, or if they can figure out what association or what organization the exposed remote desktop protocol server, what organization it's associated with, they can look for credentials from that organization in underground market. And you have to remember that there are literally billions of credentials from organizations across the globe, both small and large, that are available for sale or sometimes for free on underground markets. And they'll take 10, 15, 20 of these credentials belonging to that organization, and they'll just try and reuse them to see if they're able to gain access to that remote desktop protocol server. So that is a much more common tactic now. And again, it's a way that new ransomware actors often get their start because there's no investment cost involved for them other than scanning and time. We also see ransomware actors increasingly relying on exploits. Citrix server is a big one. Fortinet VPN vulnerabilities, Pulse Secure VPN vulnerabilities, especially with the expansion of remote work in the last year. There were a lot more of these exposed systems, and not all of them were fully patched. And this is one of those things that I know, Scott, you and I have talked about before, but I think it's really important and worth emphasizing. These ransomware actors aren't using what we call zero-day exploits. They're not using unknown exploits. They're using they're taking advantage of well-known vulnerabilities and just relying on the fact that too few organizations patch, especially patch their networking equipment, because taking it offline, kicking people off the network is such a pain in the butt. It keeps getting put off later and later. So they're not doing anything super sophisticated. They're just relying on the fact that too many organizations don't patch in a timely manner. And so there are a lot of vulnerable systems exposed on the internet. And then the last thing we see is with the Hafnium vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange. We've seen several ransomware actors use those Hafnium vulnerabilities to gain access to the networks to deploy ransomware. And Scott, I think you and I talked about this last time I was on, last time we did one of these, but maybe it was a different conversation we had. It's weird to me, having been in this industry for a long time, how we've gone from why would you ever trust Microsoft to host your Exchange server in the cloud to why would you host your Exchange server locally when Microsoft does such a great job of hosting it in the cloud?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete 180, and kudos to Microsoft for improving their security so much that, you know, with a vulnerability like Hafnium, for who did host their Exchange server in the cloud locally, then it was entirely possible that you were going to be vulnerable to this kind of attack.
Yeah,
so
it goes
when we
to that
talk
whole,
about how the different
whole...
affiliates use different tools, this is an example from one RAS variant. So this is just one RAS offering that's out there. And here are all the different ways that we've been able to track the different affiliates gaining access. So some have used credential reuse, some have used phishing with Google Docs, not Microsoft Office documents, which has been traditional, but they've moved on to using Google Docs in their phishing emails. And then some have used CD 221 20016, which is a vulnerability in the Sonic Wall VPN. Oops, I think I hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. I shouldn't be talking with my hands. Once they're in the network, some affiliates use Cobalt Strike, some use PS Exec, and then other tools that they've used that we've detected with various attacks are AdRecon, Mimikatz, AdFind, to steal and export files, rclone, 7-zip, and then usually SFTP or FTP to export the files. Once they're in the network, some move around with RDP internally, some have used TeamViewer, others have used legitimate credentials. And this is why it makes it hard to detect some of these ransomware attacks. It's not that they're using any super sophisticated tools, but they're using so many different tools depending on the affiliate and what they're comfortable with, that you have to watch and detect for all of these in order to either stop initial entry or stop the movement around the network. And that is why detection has been such a challenge for so many different teams that are out there, because there is such this variety of tools. And again, that's just one RAS variant. Multiply that by 30 different variants and having to put together a sheet like this for each one of them makes it hard. There are some things that are reused pretty consistently, like we see a lot of Cobalt Strike used with ransomware. We see a lot of Mimikatz and so on. So some of those, you may just wind up detecting all different kinds of ransomware variants in your network by looking for those activities. But it is still, each one has a little bit of a unique take on it, and so having to detect for all of those is certainly a challenge. But it's not just the tools. The expansion of the ransomware extortion ecosystem is a real problem, because you don't just have to protect every potential entrance into your network or every potential movement around your network. You have to monitor for all sorts of stolen data and understand the potential for extortion threats. So we've already talked a little bit about client contact information, how ransomware actors use that to weaponize their negotiations to try and force you to pay. They've also used things like cyber insurance policies. They look for the cyber insurance policy to see whether or not there is one and what the most payout is, and they adjust that based on the ransom demands. Stock exchange. We had one ransomware group that had talked about going to stock exchanges when they hit a publicly traded company to try and get the stock to tank if the victims didn't pay the ransom. What's interestingly is that's actually not very effective, because most companies, there are certainly some exceptions, but most companies, their stock actually recovers fairly well after a ransomware attack. They may see a 1 or 2 day dip, but then it pops right back up after. Occasionally, some companies have a complete disaster of a recovery from a ransomware attack, and that does hurt their stock long term. But for the most part, most organizations are able to recover fairly quickly. We've seen ransomware actors threaten to launch DDoS attacks against victims who refuse to pay, which obviously, if you're not going to pay to recover your files and you're not going to pay to prevent files from being leaked, I don't know that you're necessarily going to pay to not be DDoSed, but it is something that they've tried. And then, interestingly, moving to a very specific kind of blackmail, we have seen ransomware actors that purposely look for desktops of senior executives in the company, so CEOs, CTOs, vice presidents, look for any potentially embarrassing files on those desktops and steal those and then not publish them to the extortion site, but instead hold them as part of the negotiation and threaten to leak them to the press or to somebody else if a ransom isn't paid. So there's a lot of different ways that these ransomware actors are really trying to figure out how to better extort files, how to better extort victims, and gain that type of access that they need to leverage they need in order to get money from their victims. And I think we're starting to see this now, and Scott, you've worded it very well at the beginning of the conversation, with Colonial Pipeline, with JBS, and with Cox Media, with the ransomware attacks against hospitals. I think people are starting to realize that basically all ransomware attacks are third-party attacks. So almost no ransomware attack at this point impacts just the victim. It impacts the customers of the victim. It impacts the partners of the victim. It sometimes even impacts the customers of the customers of the victim. For example, nobody on the East Coast bought gas directly from Colonial Pipeline, but everybody on the East Coast was impacted when they were no longer able to ship oil, because the Colonial Pipeline's direct customers couldn't buy gas from them, which meant that the customers of those customers couldn't get gas at the pump. So that's something that we're seeing more and more of, that awareness of how these ransomware attacks actually impact us all. So how can you protect yourself from these ransomware attacks? There's no one simple solution. I think at this point we're all fully aware of that, but it's hard to figure out what a good solution is. So I think it's important to understand that as you have to have good backups, but good backups aren't enough at this point. You have to be much more proactive in defending your organization. You want to stop the attackers before they can cause damage, and that is, you want to either, if you can stop them at the initial point of entry, that's great, but you also want to have a backup plan in case you miss that. You want to be able to detect the movement in the network. You want to be able to detect files potentially being stolen. You want to detect all of these different types of activities that are associated with the ransomware attack, so that at any point in the attack chain, you'll have a plan in place to be able to stop the ransomware actor if you miss the previous previous point in the attack chain. I highly encourage organizations to plan for an attack before it happens. You want to engage your team in tabletop exercises so you can have a real-life plan in place for ransomware. A lot of people think that, I think we know what we're going to do if we're able to ransomware. We're going to do this, this, and this. And then the ransomware attack comes and you find out that your plan doesn't work, or they encrypted things that were an important part of that communication, which is really important. When you're planning for your ransomware attack, when you're engaging in these tabletop exercises, plan for how you're going to communicate with each other out of band. So if the ransomware actor takes your mail server offline or takes your Slack server offline, make sure you have phone numbers and a coherent communication plan. You don't want some people communicating over text, some people communicating over private email, some people using Signal. You want the same group of people all communicating in the same format so that you have a flow of communications. And start thinking about when you're planning for these ransomware attacks and engaging in these tabletop exercises, start thinking about what you would do if it's not you that's hit with the ransomware attack, but if it's one of your partners or one of your or one of your clients or one of your vendors, somebody that has sensitive data. What do you do if they're hit with a ransomware attack and your data is unavailable, but there's nothing that you can do about it because they're the ones hit with the ransomware attack? I highly recommend threat hunting for latest indicators of ransomware actors. You don't want to focus on the ransomware variants necessarily because you can look for the hashes of the ransomware variants, but by the time those hashes appear, it's too late. Your files are already being encrypted. You want to focus on the tools that are used across multiple ransomware groups. So we talked earlier about Cobalt Strike and Mimikatz. You want to look for those tools that the ransomware actors are using during the hands-on keyboard phase while they're trying to gain the accesses they need in order to deploy the ransomware. You want to be able to stop the attack before it happens, ideally before they're able to steal files, but at the very least before they're able to deploy the ransomware. And keep updated in that because the ransomware actors are always changing their tactics, their techniques. They're always switching to new tools. They're scripting it out a little bit differently. So you want to keep updated on the latest data, latest information about how the ransomware actors are working. For example, I love the team over at the BFIR report. They publish really detailed analysis of ransomware attacks that show you not just the tools that were used, but the commands that were given and how they were used, when the attack happened, things like that. You want to look for that kind of data because that can be really valuable. And then the next one is kind of a controversial one. I like the use of honeypots and honeyfiles as an indicator on the network. If you do it right, it's a great indicator that, okay, there's somebody rummaging around your network where they shouldn't be, and I can use alerts on that to stop that. What I'll say is honeypots and honeyfiles are really good, but there should be kind of a bonus, right? You need to do the basics first. You need to be engaged in threat hunting. You need to make sure you're logging all the right sources. You have to make sure you have a good patch management program in place and you're regularly scanning for vulnerabilities and patching them, that you have good backups and that your backups are offline and not secure. You have to have all of those things done before you can really jump into the use of honeypots and honeyfiles on your network, because otherwise they aren't going to do you a whole lot of good. Because if you get an alert on a honeypot or a honeyfile, you may not be able to take action on it because you don't have the other infrastructure in place. Unfortunately, there's no one solution that will stop ransomware attacks. You want all of your security tools and vendors working together to disrupt the different aspects of the attack. You want to be at different places in the attack chain, and all of your different security vendors do that. But the important thing is you want to use vendors that talk to each other or talk to a SIM and that correlate that data so that you can piece together, if an attacker does gain access at some level, you can piece together where they got in, where they are, and be able to not only stop the attack, but kick them out of the network. So that's really all that I had today. I'd love it if there are any questions. Again, I know that these events always have some really smart people in attendance that ask really good questions, and I'd love to see what we can do to answer some of those.
Yeah, Alan, we did get a bunch of questions. But great presentation. Really appreciate it. As I'm looking at that last slide, I'm just going to go back to that for a second because last weekend I actually read Michael Lewis's latest book on the pandemic, and he was talking about responses, and so much of that seemed similar because he was talking about how you have different layers of like Swiss cheese, like the masks are one, and social distancing and vaccine development, but it's like there's holes in each slice of Swiss cheese, but you've got to stack them up so that the holes sort of block each other. And it's so similar with ransomware. It seems like a metaphor for how important it is not to just do backups or, and think that you're covered by that, but, that there are, different steps that you need to take. That was a great slide.
And you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So we do have some questions. Of course, I also have some questions, but we'll do the audience questions first because it's they're that's why we're here. So how do you?
And you and I
can
talk anytime.
Absolutely. So we had a question from Tim who says, how do you go about tracking down a ransomware criminal after an attack?
Generally, unfortunately, you don't. So most ransomware, something like 85% of ransomware actors are in Russia or Russia-aligned states. So we don't really have a way of tracking down the actual criminal. That's what law enforcement has to do. What we can do is track down which group it is. Sometimes it's fairly obvious with the ransom node, et cetera. But we can also track where data is sent. So we saw that in the Colonial Pipeline attack, where they managed to disrupt the ability of the threat actor to actually exfiltrate data. They got it to a first stage, an intermediary point, but then couldn't get it to the final destination because of quick action on the part of Mandiant, which is fantastic. But the individual actors are difficult to track down sometimes not that hard. Again, the affiliates especially sometimes have really poor OPSEC. We'll occasionally find an email address in that was used in a underground forum by one of the affiliates, and then find out that email address is tied to a Facebook account, their actual Facebook account. So, and that the Facebook account isn't locked down. So there are things like that. Now, again, there's nothing we as a company or you as a victim can do about that person unless you want to go post mean things on their Facebook profile. Although I don't recommend that, because law enforcement can then use that information to get more data. And if you go taunt them on Facebook, they're going to make their profile private. So we like to encourage people not to let the bad guys know when they have bad OPSEC, because it makes law enforcement's job easier. So there actually are ways that you can track them down to a point, but with most of these threat actors being inside Russia or inside one of the CIS countries, it's very difficult for us to take any action directly against them.
Okay. Yeah, you talked a lot about these ransomware as a service organization, and it's so interesting because they have to run a business on the dark web. So it seems like it would be possible to, in some ways maybe easier to infiltrate them. Like, how effectively are U.S.-based authorities, and this would be your impression. I mean, I wouldn't imagine you have any way to know, or if you did, you wouldn't be able to talk about it. But how effectively are they sort of in those networks, causing fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and disrupting these organizations?
It's funny. I was just talking with somebody. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just talking to somebody about that. The bad guys are the bad guys are paranoid and superstitious. So you could run, if a government agency wanted to, you could probably run an effective PSYOPs campaign against them and use that to create discord amongst the RAS community if you wanted to. Unfortunately, the way the affiliate programs work for a lot of the higher tier, lower tier ransomware actors, anybody can join the affiliate program. If you've got money, if you've got a few $200 in Bitcoin that you can send to them, you can become an affiliate. You get full access to the control panel and so on. But for the higher level affiliates, or RAS services, the higher tier RAS services, it's a lot more difficult. They tend to be invitation only, and there has to be a reputation. So you have to have launched ransomware attacks. You have to be able to show your bona fides as a real bad guy, because they are suspicious of law enforcement trying to infiltrate them. Surprisingly, Dutch, or maybe it's only surprising to me because I don't have a lot of experience with them, the Dutch law enforcement organization has had some success there, and they've been part of a lot of the joint takedowns the FBI has done with foreign law enforcement services.
Okay. All right. Another question, this one from Wes. At what point should you involve the FBI or another law enforcement group?
So FBI will tell you to call them as soon as you're hit. That is you want to bring them in right away. And depending on the type of organization you have, so if you fall under the critical infrastructure bandwidth nomenclature, you're one of the 13 different critical infrastructure silos. They will send reinforcements to help you with troubleshooting and incident response and so on. If you fall outside of that, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that the FBI will be able to help you with. I do think it's still important to give them a call. If not immediately, you want to give them a call fairly quickly, only because getting that information out, they may have resources that even if they can't send somebody on site, they may have resources that may be able to help you. We saw this earlier this year with DarkSide ransomware. There was actually a decryptor that the FBI had gotten from a security company, and they were quietly handing that out to victims of the DarkSide ransomware. Unfortunately, another security vendor also figured that out and published it, which I'm all for full disclosure and being open as possible. But when that security company disclosed that there was a decryptor out there, the DarkSide ransomware quickly updated their code to fix the flaw, so that wasn't able to use. So it is worth notifying them. If they can't, send direct resources, they may have other resources they can at least send out to you to help.
So another question comes in from Kenneth, who's asking, have any of the ransomware bad guys ever been tracked and caught by the DOJ and the FBI? Have they been prosecuted, or is that information classified? Are there any high-profile examples of federal agents, effectively prosecuting anyone in ransomware?
So not. The only one that we have is earlier this year, one of the affiliates was actually, who's a Canadian citizen, was captured in Florida. He is in the process of being prosecuted. I don't think he has been yet. There was a ransomware actor who was prosecuted in the UK a couple years ago. So he was engaged in ransomware activity and he was engaged in ransomware activity, and he got he got caught and was arrested. There is an interesting case, and Scott, you've probably heard about this. There was a Russian national who came to California, and he offered a Tesla employee $1 million to plug in a USB drive that had ransomware on it in an attempt to launch a ransomware campaign against Tesla. The employee went to the FBI right away. The FBI did a sting operation, and then they caught the Russian as he was boarding the plane. I don't know what the status of that case is, but that was pretty. That was a pretty serious event.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Tim had a follow-up question, which is sort of the $65 million question. He says, if not required by law, does it make more sense to keep the fact that you were the victim of an attack public or private?
Good question, and there's a lot of debate on that. So yeah. As a journalist and as a researcher, we want as many people to let people know as possible. Not because we're nosy, but having a good overview of the actual number of attacks helps us better prepare for how people should protect themselves. And especially if there's any data that you can share from an attack that's not going to compromise your organization. Tools that were used, commands that were run, time of the attack, all of these things are incredibly valuable as we're building database of databases of ways that people can protect themselves. And so I do recommend disclosure whenever possible, but I completely understand why some organizations, especially if you stop the attack, you're able to recover. I do understand why some organizations would not want to share that information.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those classic tragedy of the commons sort of examples where there's sort of no incentive for you once you're hit to,
right.
There's nothing positive that comes from it. I mean, you mentioned the stock value that typically bounces back, but the reputational hit. The fact that you're flagging yourself as someone who's had a security breach that makes you a target for every other bad actor out there. But on the other hand, it helps everyone else and you down the road in sort of a theoretical sense massively because there's real information out about what is happening. Yeah, a really, really tough one. Next question from JC is wondering how did the bad actors in the recent attacks, Colonial and JBS, get in? Were they phishing or zero-day? You mentioned RDP exploits are growing in importance. Do we know yet what happened there?
Neither one of them have disclosed how the ransomware actors have gotten in. Again, that is a big part of why I think disclosure is so important and should be more broadly applied. I don't necessarily want to do it while you're in the middle of incident response and so on, but having an after-action report like that would possibly help protect the next organization. We just don't know at this point how they got in. I could wildly speculate, but that doesn't really help anybody. It makes me look cool if I happen to be right, but it doesn't actually help anybody for me to just wildly speculate as to what it was.
Right. Anthony put in another point about, one negative about not disclosing is it'd be worse if the public found out about it later if you hit it. That's a great point, Anthony, and we've seen that in a few cases where it later emerged that somebody had hidden something and it was hit at that point.
Yeah, the cover-up's always worse than the crime, right? Isn't that what they say?
That's what they say. That's right. And probably have time for one more question here. We've got one from Seth. Is there good collaboration between governments and the private sector? And how do you see this improving, or could it be improved?
There is. So there's a lot of really good collaboration. A lot of it is one-off, which is the problem. We need to have a more formalized method of collaboration. So, for example, I knew the Friday before, the Friday night when Colonial was having problems, we didn't know for sure it was ransomware attack. I didn't know for sure until Saturday morning that it was a ransomware attack because some of my contacts at CISA reached out to me over Signal and said, hey, what do you know about DarkSide ransomware? And the fact that I had two contacts reaching out to me, asking me about that question, I was very quickly able to point together, okay, so Colonial Pipeline was hit by DarkSide ransomware. Because otherwise, why would they be asking me about that at 8 a.m. on a Saturday?
Right.
Little bit of inside baseball. I was at my stepdaughter's graduation from medical school, and my wife had made it very, very clear that I was not to be doing any work that weekend because I was in charge of photography. And then suddenly this happened and my phone blew up, and I'm like on the phone with government agencies, people from the press, my CEO, who also is getting questions from government agencies and people from the press, trying to answer those questions without my wife actually seeing me answer questions and take pictures of my stepdaughter graduating from medical school. It was a really rough couple of hours.
All right. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have time for, so we're going to leave it there. But thanks again, Alan. Great stuff as always. And I also want to thank the audience for all the great questions. Thanks for your engagement. Really appreciate it. So everybody, stay tuned.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a short break. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. I love the questions I get. That's really one of my favorite parts of doing this is the great and insightful questions that the audience always has. So thank you all. And of course, thank you, Scott and Rubrik, for sponsoring this.
Yep. Great. Yeah, so we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day, which is what to do if ransomware strikes you. So take a chance to check out those resources on your console provided by Rubrik, and we will be right back.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here, and also thanks to our speakers, my fellow moderators, and of course Rubrik for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. My name is David Rammel. I'm the editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, and I'm here to moderate the second session of our Ransomware and Remediation Summit called What to Do If Ransomware Strikes You. Our speaker for this session is Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tricon Elite Consulting. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with over 20 years of experience in the IT industry. His background includes data communications networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. Dave, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Thanks a lot for having me, David, and thanks for the team for giving me the opportunity to present on this topic that's so near and dear to my heart, ransomware. And this is a great topic that we're going to be looking at today, which is what do you do if ransomware strikes you and your organization? A little bit of brief background on myself and experience with ransomware starting from 2020 to now, basically. COVID-19 struck around March of 2020 of last year. The uptick in ransomware attacks was just immense throughout our customer base and kind of industry-wide through all vertical sectors. Throughout 2020, I was part of 7 ransomware recovery efforts where organizations were hit with either user-based ransomware attacks where it was just a low-privileged user, maybe some file services that got taken out, as well as full-on admin-level attacks. And these would be the ones that you would see similar to what's been in the news recently with Colonial and some of the other big ones. And they were the ones that would completely shut down an organization and kind of kill a lot of outlying services. So the goal for this session here over the next hour is to give you some tips and tricks, what to do and what the procedure looks like if your organization does get hit. And, maybe your organization already has been unfortunately hit. Many have across the world today. And I like to put this into kind of our DR and cybersecurity ransomware playbook, a lot of these top topics. So let's go through a bit of a scenario here. It's one Monday morning, and you're coming into the office, and all of a sudden, your phone's lighting up with service desk messages that access to core level services are down. You're not sure why. And all of a sudden, somebody directly phones your phone and says, you know what? We're getting these weird notes that are just automatically printing themselves off on the printers, and it looks like it's some type of a ransom note demanding that we contact some kind of weird email here. What should we do next? So this is a really critical step for you, and I'll explain why. First thing is to shut it all down. I know organizations don't like to do this, but you have no idea where the attack is coming from. So you have to immediately try to fence off what's going on and slowly bring services back online as you're able to contain and fence them off. The other reason that you might want to do this is this might be your only way and or chance to salvage data, especially if you've caught the attacker mid-flight and they haven't had a chance to spawn their way through all of the infrastructure. Now, the amount of time that you have between the actual attack and the time that the threat actor got in could be as low as 4 hours from entry to execution. We've seen this a lot with Cobalt Strike V2 and Ryuk ransomware attacks out in the field where it's rapidly escalated and it happens fast. One of the things that's most important for you to turn off when you look at your servers and core infrastructure you need to make sure that you secure all backups that you have of your infrastructure. We had one incident where the attacker actually systematically took out all of the backup targets. And so this whole day is sponsored by Rubrik, a company that specializes in backup and recovery and making sure that organizations can stay online. You need to make sure that you protect that as some of the most critical data and critical assets, because that may be your only way to recover. So I know it's tough to pull the plug, but it's sometimes the only thing that you can do. And it's sometimes we don't think about this, and we sit around strategizing and planning and thinking about things, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Sometimes just pulling the plug and blocking them and stopping them at that point in time is just the right thing to do. And so that's kind of a very big one in the hit list, because then we can systematically go start turning things on when we can fence them off and protect them. Number two is we have to take and, make the phone call, the dreaded phone call. And who's the phone call to? It's not necessarily going to be to your bosses. It's going to be to your cybersecurity insurance vendor. I know we can have a kind of virtual show of hands out there for all of our attendees that are listening today. Many of your organizations are going to have cybersecurity insurance policies that protect against ransomware and cybersecurity incidents and these types of attacks. Inside of those policies, they're going to have a protocol that you have to follow in the event of a cyber attack like this. And it will say that, you need to email this email account. You need to take and phone this phone number and get the process started. Some of the other things that you have to do is you have to call in your teams. So after you call in a cyber insurance vendor, the reality is that they're going to have their own cybersecurity professionals that are part of that policy. They're going to be coming in and checking root cause analysis. One piece of advice I have before you have to make that call on the dreaded one Monday morning is contact your cyber insurance vendor and find out if you can have your trusted consultants and outside contractors added to the approved contact list and authorization list in there prior to the event happening. You don't want to be negotiating that on a Monday morning when they say, no, we've got our team and they're good. You can push back a little bit before that ever happens and negotiate that in as part of your policy. The next thing you're going to have to do is call your team. Well, this is where you go back to good old pen and paper, folks. I had a situation last year where a customer had all of the contact sheets on the file server. File server was encrypted. Okay, now how do you call the experts when you don't have the phone numbers in the contact list and you're locked out of your Office 365 subscription? So all accounts have no access and the threat actors are inside of there. How do you do it? How do you get access to phone in the resources that you need? Always make sure that you have a copy of your DR runbook, your cybersecurity. I call them the red and blue books that you have for procedures and protocols. Print it off somewhere where you've got access to them. Make sure you've got those most important contacts available to you. Now, the tough one. Now comes the phone call, which has probably been made before you called the cyber insurance vendor, which is calling the executives of the organizations and having kind of an all-hands-on-deck call, stating that, we've had a cyber event and this is what's going on, and you have to set forth a course of action that they're going to understand. And how are they going to understand that? You have to train and for this particular event ahead of time so that everybody is aware of the protocol and procedure. Right now with COVID-19, it's not as bad because many organizations are still in a work from home, work from everywhere type mentality. And prior to that, it was a big deal to have to pick up the phone and send everybody home from the office. And so that's typically what's going to have to happen, because when you're ransomed, it's not typically a quick fix. You might as well just send people home for the day or ask them to take the day off or days off work, because there's really nothing that they can do if they're not part of the direct recovery team. All right? And so that's a really important one. And you need the executive sponsorship there to make sure that your IT teams are protected during the cyber event and not bombarded from every single manager wondering when they're going to be getting access back to their key and critical systems. There will be a checklist of, which systems are brought online first, but you need the support of the executive leadership team to explain to the company that, the recovery efforts are in place, and it's going to take time. And so even in IT, we'll typically designate somebody that's part of the recovery team that's a liaison to the executive so that the workers can just go ahead and do the work and not be bombarded and pulled off into side calls. The next thing that you're going to do prior to bringing those systems back online is, and this is actually based out of a live situation that we had over the summer in 2020. We had an organization that was hit by a whole-level ransomware attack. The cyber insurance vendor brought in their cyber team to come in and analyze things, and before they would allow anything to come back online into the network, we would bring on the PCs one by one and immediately deploy threat protection software onto there. These sensors are known as advanced persistent threat protection sensors that are loaded by the software. Carbon Black is a very popular one, as well as Microsoft Defender ATP. I'm more of a Microsoft professional myself, so typically we would lead with Defender ATP. But what this does is this is going to give you insight onto the systems and how they're behaving. So if something is out there trying to communicate with a command and control service out there, we're going to be able to see it and immediately isolate it from the console while we're able to go ahead and start performing root cause analysis to see where and how this got in. This is going to be a very important tool and a very important step. How can you protect your organization if you're not using ATP and just relying on traditional antivirus today? I like to tell my customers and people that I talk to as I go speak around the world, antivirus is not enough alone. You must have some type of an advanced persistent threat protection service and software that you're using, because the threat landscape moves so fast that it's nearly impossible to keep up with everything. And many of the tactics that the threat actors are going to be using today are designed to evade traditional antivirus. In fact, I've got some of my friends that are Microsoft security MVPs, and they actually do sessions on how to evade antivirus and show how important it is to have a third-party solution or third solution in there to protect your endpoints. And by your endpoints, it's not just your desktops. You also have to protect your servers as well. So consider having ATP on your servers as well as your desktops so you can get a complete picture and a complete view of what's going on. The next piece of this is after we get the ATP sensors loaded and we started to detect some triggers of activities coming off of infected or compromised workstations or servers, now we have the ability to start threat hunting. Threat hunting is the ability to take and load all of that information into a large single database and be able to run queries against this very quickly. From a Microsoft landscape, the threat hunting engine that comes with Microsoft Defender ATP is configured to use what are called Custo queries inside of there. And so it's very easy for us to go check all of the logs across all of the systems that have been reporting and to see if we're finding any of these entry points coming in. It could be as simple as looking for an event log entry. It could be as simple as looking for a file. It could be as simple as looking for a registry key or a DLL that's living on the system. And this will give us a better idea to potentially compromise systems that haven't had code base executed on them yet or are potentially evading our threat protection solutions that are out there. Now, this number 3 and 4 kind of work hand in hand for us working towards root cause and trying to lock things down. Remember, at this point in time, we are not letting the business return to service. We are still in an investigation phase. We're trying to figure out where this came in and how bad it is, because if you followed my instructions from the beginning in turning everything off, whatever's happening has slowed its course at least a little bit, and we're able to take and start gaining access back to certain key critical systems. And the reason it's important to protect these devices when they come back online and be able to isolate them is, for example, you might think that, oh, I need to take and get authentication back rolling in my infrastructure. The threat actors took out the domain controllers, and, I'm able to recover them with, our favorite backup tool that we're using. And so we're able to restore those in an uncompromised state. Well, what happens if you just roll those back out on the floor and a compromised workstation still has access to get back into those systems? You're starting all over again. So it's so important that we're able to take and lock this down and slowly start reintroducing infrastructure during these types of attacks. All right, this leads into the next topic. Are your backups even viable? Any backup solution that you're going to be using needs to be tested. We used to say that annual DR testing was kind of the norm. So if you had some type of a DR solution, you had a cold DR site, we would want to test as an IT team at least once a year, making sure that that was up and running and operational. Well, that type of a recovery is based on a scenario that is not driven by a cybersecurity event like ransomware. That type of event is driven by, like, for example, a natural disaster. I know in a lot of the southern states, you deal with a lot of tornadoes, you deal with a lot of hurricanes coming through, and with that comes a lot of flooding, power outages, and we have to fail over just because of natural disasters that are rolling through. And so when we look at traditional DR, the rules that apply to traditional DR and backups are not the same for cyber events. You almost have to have two playbooks that you're running side by side. You have to have traditional DR where you get the call that we're doing maintenance on PDU in a circuit inside of the data center, and this particular rack's going to be going down for a particular period of time, and you're going to have to fail over that to, either the hot site or to another rack in the same data center, and you can plan for that event, and we call that event in our world a planned failover. And so that's something that you can actually go through and mimic and model, and you can prepare for. Where, for example, with a cyber event, it's not the same. Everything happens a lot faster, and you need to make sure that you're able to actually recover that infrastructure. And so in this topic, we're going to talk about something a little bit later on, which is, how do we make sure that all of our backups, are protected? And so one of the key pieces of this is you want to make sure that all of your backups are potentially in a separate Active Directory domain and Active Directory forest. And the reason for that is if the threat actors come into your primary domain and they knock out your entire Active Directory forest, at least my backups are living in another environment so I can restore right back over top. If everything lives in a flat attack surface, now they have the ability to go after the backups in the same way that they went after all of your primary servers and all of your primary infrastructure. And we call that building a secure, guarded fabric. And that is an essential part of recovering on the bad Monday morning that you've had. I've seen situations where organizations went to this flat domain infrastructure. And you know who's at fault for a flat domain infrastructure? We, as IP, are at fault for this. Because for years, we've been preaching to everyone in IT that a single domain is easier to manage. We can set up our security boundaries, less management overhead. If you started back from the days of early NT 3.5.1 and NT 4 like I did, we had lots of domains typically out at each of the sites. And then Windows 2000 rolled around, and we started this massive consolidation project over the last 20 years. And so certain organizations went from hundreds of domains potentially to the utopia of a single domain. Well, the problem is that once you hit that utopia of a single domain, you actually caused yourself a very big problem from a cybersecurity perspective, is that now if you have an admin level breach inside of that single domain, that flat attack surface, and all of your backups are part of that same infrastructure, all of that infrastructure just got taken out at the same time. 3 times last year, I saw this happen with flat domain infrastructure, and as part of our recovery effort, we started the rebuild of the infrastructure and the core hypervisors with a guarded fabric. And so That's something that's very important to take away from the session if you're not doing it today, is to make sure that you protect those backups. And I've actually got a new saying that I have working with my customers, and that is DR and backups are just as much production as production. Because when you have to recover and that is not available, the whole part and process of buying that solution was 100% pointless. So DR and recovery are production the same way that your production servers are today, and they need to be treated accordingly, and they need to be protected accordingly. All right. So now we're going to walk through the scenario that the threat actors got all of your backups. They were able to get an admin level compromise. You're thinking to yourself, well, our cybersecurity posture that we have is pretty good. You know, we're going to take, and we've never been hit, knock on wood. Executives aren't really taking this terribly seriously right now, and we don't really have the spend to put into cybersecurity, and we don't think it's going to be us. It's going to be the neighbor down the street that's going to potentially get hit. Well, Gartner actually just came out with a study a few months ago saying that executives are going to be potentially personally liable for cybersecurity and ransomware events. So I don't know, if you're an executive that's watching this or part of an executive board, you need to seriously pay attention to ransomware, because especially when it's going to be hitting your own personal pocketbook, you better make sure that you've got good liability insurance, especially if you're not paying attention to what's going on. So the scenario here is an organization that I was working with last year had an admin level compromise. And how did the admin level compromise take place? Well, it was very simple. And you can take this away as a side note as well. Service accounts that have admin level access to all workstations are very, very dangerous, especially the ones that we use as part of our desktop management solution. So one of these set attacks actually came in with that as an entry point vector. And it actually was caused because of COVID-19 and work from anywhere. These machines were secured, and we thought that they were secured on our corporate on-prem infrastructure. Then COVID-19 hit. Each of us in IT had to scramble to go build VPN solutions to get workers working from home and working remotely. What this meant is that the scales of security versus functionality dramatically shifted. We were told, get everybody back to work right now. The company's going to go out of business. We need these engineers working. Fix the security holes later. Okay, everybody grab your laptops. Let's go set up some VPNs from home. Well, the problem is that the home networks are not nearly as secure as the corporate network infrastructure. Typically, that's a design where you've got a home router and you've got a lot of personal devices on there. There's not typically restrictions on surfing the internet. And at the end of the day, it's not difficult for a threat actor to jump across the network and gain access to one of these corporate devices from the home network. So that's what happened. The entry points actually came in for a few of our attacks from endpoint VPN configurations, where they were able to gain admin level access of those workstations, and then play some tricks with the service desk where they could take and cause problems on those systems, have a service desk professional log in with admin credentials, and then they could escalate and elevate if they didn't already have it. And then they could go to tier 2, and then they can jump around, and it's not hard from there. All right. And so at the end of the day, admin level compromise caused by lack of security through either services or just, COVID-19 work from home has been a big entry point and target. So now they've got admin level access. And so one of these organizations actually gave their service desk domain admin privileges. If you are doing this today, please stop this immediately. We do not need to have domain admin level access roaming around our infrastructure. I know it's easier to manage things, but it's a very bad idea. And this is what happens on the bad Monday morning when that's part of your management design is ease of use versus security. That admin level compromise came from that account, and they got access to everything. They sat in the infrastructure for about probably 2 weeks. reconned everything. They knew that month end was a really bad time to hit and that everybody would be scrambling. So what's the first thing that they did is they went after all the backups and all the replicas. So it was a flat domain attack surface, so there was no guarded fabric. And so they took out all the backups. They were so nice to knock out all of our NAS devices where we had historical copies of all of our data to a factory. So when you went to go log back onto them, it was like welcome, the initial welcome screens were set back. So that was pretty nice of them to do factory resets on everything. And then what they did is they set timers on all of the servers that when we logged in, you were able to view the data for about, 90 seconds, and then you got to watch it Pac-Man away right in front of your eyes. And it's and basically it was, well, you should have made the call and you should have paid us, because if you keep logging on to things, bad things are going to happen. And that's my point of shutting things down. Don't just go start logging into everything to see why things are wrong. Once you discover that you have a breach like this, sometimes shutting things off before more malware or the threat actor can get in further is an important piece of this. So now you're stuck. You have no backups, and what do? You have to make a choice whether or not you're going to take and pay. Well, you've just been knocked back to the Stone Age from an infrastructure perspective, and aside from rebuilding everything from scratch, what are you going to do? So the decision comes that, okay, cybersecurity insurance vendor, we're stuck here. Their cyber team say, yeah, you're pretty stuck. You're going to have to go get a decryption key, and you're going to have to go through some type of a recovery exercise here. So what happens is the cyber insurance vendors actually have negotiators that are actually built into the policy, and they specialize in talking and negotiating with the bad guys. And so when they do that, they're going to come back to you with a number. And this is the way that it worked for the organization that I worked with. You have to prepay as the organization. And I'm not saying all policies are like this. I'm just going based off of my experience. That organization had to pay out of a reserve fund the amount that was designated by the threat actors and negotiated, and to be reimbursed at a later point in time by the cyber insurance vendor. How long that is, I don't know. That's above my pay grade to figure those types of pieces out. And another really important part of this is there's no guarantees that recovery key is going to work. And we were successful in recovering about 60% of the infrastructure and manual rebuilds on the other 40%. So just because you pay doesn't mean you get everything back, and doesn't mean that everything's going to work. In our scenario, what ended up happening was we were able to get the data back, but the OS drives were trashed on all of the application servers that were sitting there. And because all of those were trashed, we actually had to do front-end rebuilds on everything. So I'll ask you a question. In your infrastructure, you probably run SQL servers or Oracle servers, and you probably front-end an app tier that sits in front of that with all of your web servers. And so did you have really good as-built documentation on those? Is the developer that actually built the deployment methodology for all of those applications that are sitting on those web servers still around? Do you still have the source code? Do you still have all the binaries to get it back up and running? The business doesn't necessarily understand all of this, but that's the quandary that we're left with. We're basically left, for lack of better terms, with dark data that is not able to be lit up until we build a front-end server to attach it to. It's not a very good scenario at all. And so this is where it's so important to make sure that you protect those backups like they're the most important thing to you in the world, because that could be your only way back. The other thing to consider is making sure that you have off-site copies of this that are air-gapped and immutable. That is also very important. And you have those credentials stored separately, totally off the network, so that it's a different entry point to potentially get in. And this leads me into the next point of the guarded fabric. How could have that organization prevented that, and how did we protect them in the future? Well, we built out that guarded fabric when we restored. We made sure that all of that infrastructure was locked down. We made sure that we had good security baselines in place, and we followed the best practices and protocols. And one of the most important things you can think of is I saw a statistic, and it was crazy to me, that a lot of the entry points for threat actors coming in are RDP connections inside of your infrastructure. You think to yourself, okay, well, RDP to servers, we'll go ahead and we'll lock that down. Sure, but in comes COVID-19 and throws a wrench into it. You're an engineering organization, and you have to give all of the engineers access to their desktops that are all still running at the office. And so now our new rule of thumb is if you RDP to it on the network, you multi-factor it. You want to have multi-factor authentication enabled on absolutely everything you can. And this is really important because you need to make it more difficult than just a traditional username and password to get in to the infrastructure, all right? So that's a really important piece is the guarded fabric. If you're not thinking about that, it's actually fairly easy to move your infrastructure over today. I use the word easy very loosely because depending on the size of your organization. But from a Microsoft perspective, Microsoft actually supports moving Hyper-V clusters over to another domain and another forest. I do it all the time. And so we can actually slowly shift this infrastructure over to the guarded fabric, providing our secured cloud and fabric back to the organization. They can still run the same domain. They can still have all of their apps running. But now the hypervisors and the backups and all of that tiered infrastructure are now very well protected for us. All right, so now you're able to figure out that your backups are okay because maybe you had a guarded fabric in place or maybe you had an immutable air-gapped backup copy and you're able to start thinking about recovering systems. So what are some of the critical systems that you're going to bring online? I didn't put in this list the obvious things, like, for example, you need to bring domain controllers and DNS and DHCP and the core infrastructure so that you can actually operate your business. I was focusing here on more of the business level systems that you're going to bring online and what is typically expected of us in these ransomware recovery scenarios. The most critical systems that we find that organizations want to bring back online first is accounting and payroll. And the reason for this is depending on the time of month that you're hit, you might be having to upload all of your payroll files so that your employees can get paychecks. And so this is typically a pretty big priority for the organization is accounting and payroll and being able to pay some bills. When you're bringing the systems back online, you have to make sure that there is staggered entry back in, and the expectations need to be set with the managers and employees of the organization that it's going to take time to bring online services. We completely understand as IT that everybody's data is important and everybody's systems are the most important things to them right now. But this is a decision that the executive needs to make as to what departments are going to come online first. For example, if you're a manufacturing organization and you need to take and make sure that your plant floors stay running, maybe those critical PLC systems need to come online. Maybe those PLC systems that are driving all of the build cubes and stuff like that, or all of the plant's infrastructure are the ones that need to come back online first because maybe you're facing serious financial penalty for not being online and you've got contracts with upstream suppliers that are fining you on a daily or hourly basis for being offline. There's a lot of line sequence manufacturing that goes on, especially around the world and in the United States. And so suppliers rely on one another. So if the suppliers can't get the parts that they need to fulfill orders and you're holding up the other plant, typically there's some type of a consequence to that. And it encourages the organization to actually stay online. So that's a decision that basically needs to be made very early on in the process once you realize what data is viable. The unfortunate reality is, depending on how bad this is for the organization, I've seen plants like that shut down for a significant amount of time. There's one healthcare organization inside of Ohio that was publicly disclosed. They were down for the better part of a month at this time last year during COVID-19. They actually had to shut down all of their hospitals, and they had to transfer patients in critical care and acute care out to other sister hospitals that were outside of their organization so that they could get the care that they needed while they figured out what was going on. And so in that situation, the loss and damage to reputation and or the fact of risk of patient lives is huge. So, taking this seriously and keeping your systems online is of utmost performance. And remember, if you haven't been hit yet, I'm not saying that you're going to be hit, but you have to be prepared because this is not getting any better. All right, so the next one is, in the last session, there was a question that came about in regards to who needs to be notified in the event of a breach. And so I'm from Canada, and in Canada we have something called the Privacy Commissioner and the Privacy Commissioner's Office. And around the world, this kind of flows in Europe with GDPR and other policies that have been put in place from government organizations. There's actually a point in time that you have as a responsible organization to notify upstream government agencies of a breach. And so for us in Canada, it's the Privacy Commissioner. And where do we have to worry about that? If we're at all concerned not just about ransom, but about data exfiltration, which is what I'm going to talk about a little bit later on in a ransomware attack. Where did that data go? Who has that data? What type of data is it? Is there any personally identifiable information that lives in any of that was taken offline? I'll take you back to the one Monday morning story, okay? And I hope that I'm not scaring everyone too much during the session because these are my real notes from the field. But the next scenario that I have for you is the one Monday morning with a ransomware attack. The ransomware attack is where they just want to exfiltrate your data, and the ransom note that you get is, "Hello, organization. Due to your lax security, we have now sucked out of your network 2 terabytes of data. As you can see, I have logs on your firewall that show that we're actually taking this." We've actually been so nice as to leaving all of our hacking tools online in the following profiles on all of your servers. It's like, really? So you go to log into the domain controller. Oh, sure enough, they went after all of the key task files that we had on the network. Look at that. You can actually see the searches that they were using. Oh, look at that. They left the Cobalt Strike V2 beacon in place so that if we don't pay, they can jump back in and then really ransom us. At the end of the day, it's a business for these organizations, and they're holding you hostage, and they'll hold your data hostage on-prem with a lock and a key and a ransom that we think about that, I need a decryption key. But isn't it so much easier just to steal your data and then come after you with a threat of release of that personal, private, confidential information? I don't know. Maybe you've got trade secrets that are locked up inside of there. Maybe you've got emails that you don't want the world to see. In a lot of cases, that's what organizations are faced with paying for. So that's more of where the Privacy Commissioner in Canada is interested, is what type of data was actually lost, and is this going to impact somebody's personal financial security? And so if that's the case, then they need to be notified. You need to notify your employees that all of their social security numbers, we call them social insurance numbers up here in Canada, have been compromised, and key banking information has been compromised, dates of birth have been compromised. All of that stuff that somebody can do to take individuals and have identity theft against them can happen. And so with that comes the protocols. And if you're a publicly facing company, then come the potential public statements that you have. So there is actually a requirement for organizations to comply with this. And if they don't, then there's fines and there's issues that come back for the directors of those organizations in Canada for not complying with the rules that are set forth by governmental agencies. And this is only tightening up as the threat actors in this landscape kind of expand. All right, so now that you've been hit, let's talk a little bit about what you can do to protect against this in the future and just some tips and tricks. Number one is if you run application whitelisting like that, what comes with AppLocker, you can stop probably 99% of malware dead in its tracks. I'm a very good friend with a worldwide leading security professional, Sami Laihow, and he does sessions all over the world on stopping ransomware dead in its tracks with AppLocker. In fact, you may have sat some of his sessions in the past if you went to Microsoft Ignite. You'd know him because he's probably one of the #1 speakers that's there every single year when they have the on-prem conferences. So that's important. It's application whitelisting. And he's got techniques in place that really simplify this. Number two is password-based authentication is not enough. You need to look at multi-factor authentication, especially multi-factor authentication to protect all of your Office 365 entry points. And remember, if you RDP to it, you MFA it. Loading up advanced threat protection. I get into this discussion constantly with customers. Well, you know, we would love to do advanced threat protection, but advanced threat protection is so much more money. We look at the total cost of going to a Microsoft E5-based license versus an E3-based license, and it's just too much money. The organization can't afford it. Well, it's your choice as an organization to spend the money on security or not. Traditional antivirus is not enough. You need something like this. So if it's not going to come from a Microsoft E5 on Defender Advanced Threat Protection, figure out something else so at least you have some level of protection with Advanced Persistent Threat Protection. Now, admin rights on workstations make it very difficult to lock down anything. So, and this also goes for your servers as well. So the principle of zero trust is being pushed heavily by Microsoft these days. And what this means in simple terms is that a domain admin, for example, most of us that are IT professionals know what a domain admin is. It's typically a very high privileged account in Active Directory or the highest privileged account. We want to make sure that domain admins can only log into domain controllers. Did you know that that's their only purpose in life? Then what you do is you create a tiered model where server admins can only log into servers, but they can't log into workstations and they can't log into domain controllers. And likewise, workstation admins can only log into workstations and can't log into servers and can't log into domain controllers. This way, if you do have a breach, you compartmentalize what's able to be touched in the infrastructure. Obviously, one of the worst things to have happen is to have your admin level accounts that are hitting your servers or your domain controllers hit, because most workstations, we can typically flatten the workstations and reload that infrastructure with either cloud-based tools or some type of a deployment technology. At the end of the day, zero trust is something that you've got to put on your radar if you're not doing that today. And you've got to look at that design for both servers and desktops. The next thing is cyber teaming exercises. I just held a session earlier this week with a group of executives up in Alberta, Canada. I think there was about 40 high-level IT executives that were in a roundtable briefing that we did. And this was actually very interesting. We got onto the topic of talking about cyber insurance and what some of the requirements are that the cyber insurance vendors are placing on these organizations. So cyber insurance vendors up here in Canada are starting to come back to organizations saying, we've seen quite an influx in attacks. And the number one thing that we're going to tell you is that your policy that you had where you maybe had a $10,000 deductible is no longer valid. We see you having a $3 million policy, and we're going to cover half. So you're going to have to cover the other $1.5 million. As I paused for a second, I said, excuse me? You're telling me my deductible is $1.5 million to get $1.5 million? Kind of what's the point in having cyber insurance? So it's a discussion that we're having right now. But yes, that's a live conversation that we've had. The next thing that they said is they want you to actively prove that you're doing red and blue teaming exercises to prove and validate that your defenses will hold, as well as pen testing, and going through security audits and reviews and proving that before they'll sign off on the riders and or give you coverage. So what's our takeaway from this session? Our little gold nugget that everybody's going to have coming away from this particular session is you want to pull out that piece of paper that is your cyber insurance policy that you have. You want to call your cyber insurance vendor, and you want to make sure that what you think you have is what you actually have. Because if you're coming up for renewal, you're going to be probably pretty surprised at some new terms and conditions that are coming through on you to be able to get that cyber insurance moving forward. All right, so it's super important, and that's why I wanted to put that in there. That actually just came out of a conversation that we had this week. All right, so the next one we talked about earlier, which is a ransomware-less attack. What the heck is that? Well, that's an attack where I don't care as a threat actor about encrypting your data on-prem. I'm going to basically exfiltrate what I have. Same steps are going to apply, and you have to decide whether you pay or not, because now recovering your data really is not an option. The recovery of your data means sending the threat actor a Bitcoin and asking them to very politely not release this out to the public. And remember, there's no guarantees that they won't do that at a future point in time or come back after you and hold you hostage again with that same data. So once it's gone, you have to kind of consider it gone, and you have to consider how important that really is to you for that living out in the wild. And so they're finding that that's a lot more leverage, because our wonderful backup vendors like Rubrik that's sponsoring this event today do a great job actually protecting people's infrastructure, and they're able to recover that infrastructure. So how are the bad guys getting around that? They're saying, well, okay, you got us. You got good recovery techniques. You can restore and you can bring everything back, and you're not feeling as much pain. So this is how we're going to make you feel pain. We're going to make you feel pain by going with a data exfiltration ransomware-less attack. Same groups that are out there doing it. It's just now they're not going to encrypt on-prem. So this is actually a pretty scary one, and you have to make sure that your firewalls are set up and all your rules are in place to protect and be able to adaptively lock this stuff down. All right, two more, and then we'll take some questions from the audience there, David. The next one is your traditional DR that you have and your backups that you have in place need to be tested on a more frequent basis. Yearly testing is not enough. Remember, I said you had to have two playbooks earlier in the session. You have to have a DR and recovery playbook, which is just for natural disasters and typical things that you see from an IT perspective going back 20 years. And then there has to be a DR-based cyber event playbook. And so that one is, they're going after my backups. They're trying to wipe everything out. I need to have my backups on some type of immutable storage. I need to have some cloud-based backups of this to protect everything off-prem. And remember, you need to test this. You need to make sure that you're going through quarterly testing of this infrastructure to make sure that it's being backed up. And my new norm is that backups in DR are just as much production as production. So put the time and effort into it the same way that you would production, because when this event hits you and you don't have this, it is absolutely pointless to have set it up in the first place. So you need to treat this and protect it as if it was production. Okay, so in a post-mortem, now you've been hit, what are you going to do to protect yourself in the future? Number one, if you don't have a cybersecurity team, you need to build one inside of your organization. You need to have and make an investment into this and take it very seriously. You need to invest in the proper cybersecurity tools that will help you with this, because the threat landscape moves so fast that certain few individuals can most definitely not keep up to date on everything. So you have to rely on some cyber vendors that are going to potentially provide you with a security operations center outsourced and be on top of all of the latest threats as they're coming down. You don't want to necessarily rely on your cyber insurance alone. For years, we've been telling people to go get cyber insurance, and now there's been so many hits and attacks and payouts that might not apply anymore. So I'm not saying don't go get it. I'm saying read the fine print, and I'm saying go check to make sure what you actually have. And that should also become part of probably a biannual exercise, because in the event that you have to pick up that policy, look through it, phone the big red number that's written inside of there, you're going to want to understand that. And the last thing is training your team is so important. It's ongoing. Invest in training, invest in your people, and best of luck to everyone out there. So with that, David, did we have any questions that came in from the audience? We got a few minutes here.
We certainly do. Here's a question from Seth. How do you view balancing internal resources versus external vendors when building your cybersecurity team?
So this is a very interesting point, and it's all about being able to skill ramp. Okay, so the way that I consider this is that it takes time to become a master at anything. And cybersecurity doesn't wait. So while we're training our team and skill ramping our team, I find it very advantageous to have the mentorship of senior security professionals around to help them down that journey. It's kind of like what I've been telling customers is that, we're at cyber war right now, and are you going to be taking a look at, having some recruits that have just come through boot camp protecting your infrastructure, or do you need SEAL Team 6 in there to be helping you out? And so at least to train up the new recruits that are coming through, we need to make sure that they're mentored properly and not just thrown to the wolves.
Okay. Here's the next question. Has the secured fabric worked for your customers in protecting against ransomware?
Oh, fantastic question, and I'm glad that one was brought up, David. Knock on wood, there's no perfect design, but the secure fabric certainly helps. Where the secured fabric is going to fall down is when we lighten security inside of that fabric infrastructure and start letting everybody in. The whole point of the secure guarded fabric is there should only be a handful of administrators that are in there, ultra high levels of constrainment for delegated roles, just-in-time access, privileged access for any of the resources in there. It will work as long as you maintain the highest levels of security inside of it.
Okay, great. Here's a question from Francis in our audience. Do we have to worry about protecting our SaaS applications and data from ransomware?
Oh, I would think absolutely, because at the end of the day, and Francis, a great question. Okay, a great question, and I'm going to follow up the question with a little bit of a scenario here, right? Because I just went through this earlier this week, and this is going to sound like the silliest thing in the world, but this actually happened. One of the organizations that I work with was looking to procure some new SaaS-based HR software. The HR directors got approval from IT. We went through all of the designs, and everything looked good. The fine print in there is that this particular organization that I was working with still ran on-prem Exchange, and part of the instruction set that was given by the SaaS-based vendor was to actually hand over all of the usernames and passwords and enter them in connectors in this third-party system. I basically just handed over all of my executive usernames and passwords out to this third-party company. And so when we caught wind of this as IT, it was already too late. It already happened. And so, that SaaS data is just as easily compromised with missteps like that. So the short answer is, do you need to protect your SaaS-based data? Absolutely, you need to protect that. Now, one of the things that you're going to be a little bit hamstrung on is that you're going to have to rely on your vendor that's providing you that solution to provide you with those recovery options and those privacy guarantees, because there's certain things that you're not going to be able to touch inside of that infrastructure and that solution. And so it's a little more difficult to do, but definitely something you should have on your radar. Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question, and this is the big one. Dave, what keeps you up late at night with ransomware?
Oh, that phone call that I get that starts off like this. Yeah, Dave, sorry to call you late at night, but it looks like we've got some ransomware roaming through the environment, and we don't know what to do because I know what comes next, and it's a very invasive process. And so that phone call, just waiting for that phone call, really keeps me up at night. And the other thing that keeps me up at night is when customers are provided with advice, tool sets, techniques to defend against ransom, and they don't take it seriously because they think that, oh, well, it's just the company next door that's going to hit. It's never going to be us, is absolutely not true. There's never been a time that's been more important to take cybersecurity 100% seriously inside of every organization. And I'll lean back and I'll have this as a closing statement, is that Gartner has actually published that executives are going to be potentially held personally liable for cyber incidents like ransomware attacks and the damage that it's doing to organizations. So if you're one of those executives or you're part of one of those boards, you need to take this stuff seriously. You need to start forming your teams. You need to start being very proactive. Don't wait until you're hit. Do what you can ahead of time to protect all your most valuable assets. And with that, I think, David, I'll hand it back to you, and I'll just say, guys, thank you very much for having me. It's been my esteemed pleasure to speak to everyone here today, and good luck with the rest of the session.
Okay, thanks, Dave.